Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Browning bar. And it's not the bar that you might be thinking of, but it is a bar and it is made by Browning. Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at the Browning bar sporting rifle. Now, when most people think about the bar, they think about the bar designed by John Moses Browning in 1918, which was actually an automatic rifle used in World War I, as well as other wars and military applications. Now, although that is a legendary rifle that definitely deserves a video on its own, we're going to have to wait to get that video out until we can actually get our hands on one of those rifles. However, for today, we are taking a look at the Browning bar sporting rifle, which also was designed by a Browning, and in this case, it was actually designed by John Browning's grandson, Bruce Browning, back in 1966. Now, this design is actually a gas-operated, semi-automatic sporting rifle with a box magazine that's actually attached to a hinge trap door. It was actually originally dubbed the Carbine 66 project, as it was designed in 1966, and then later it was called the bar, or the Browning automatic rifle, on its release in 1967. Now today we've got a 1971 Browning bar in .30-06, as well as a 1976 Browning bar in 300 Win Mag. Now both these rifles are in excellent condition, and we're really excited to get our hands on these and show you guys all here today. Now I've actually had the opportunity to take both these rifles out to the range and shoot them, and what I can tell you right off the bat is that they are definitely both quality rifles. I really like the classic look, I like the classic feel. The bluing looks great, the wood looks great, and they're a little bit heavier, so they do feel really good in the hands, especially for those higher caliber cartridges. Now, another thing that I really like out of the gates is that not only did they make the standard cartridges on these, but they also made Magnum cartridges on these as well, which is pretty impressive considering that these are semi-automatic rifles, right? So those are some things that I really like out of the rifle right out of the gates. Some of the things that I don't necessarily like, or that I'm a little more hesitant on, is really the bolt action. And what I mean by that is that after that last round is fired, the bolt actually gets hung up on the follower. And the only way that you can release that bolt forward is either one, by pulling the bolt back and dropping the magazine to bring the bolt forward, or bring the bolt back using your finger in the action to actually push that follower down and again bring that bolt forward. Which, you know, if you're up in a tree or something like that, that can get a little bit cumbersome. Now, Remington did solve that problem with the 740, 742, and 7400. They were actually able to take their detachable box magazine and put a little lever on there that when you depress or move that lever over, it brings that follower down, which then automatically releases the bolt forward. So I definitely prefer that design over this. However, you know, in all things considered, it's definitely a quality rifle that we had no problem shooting out at the range. All right, so as for shootability, we did take both these rifles out to the range. It was my first time shooting them. For the .30-06 specifically, we actually shot Federal 150 grain through that. And after 3 groups of 3 shots each at 100 yards, the best grouping that I was able to get was 1 1/4 inch. In terms of 300 Win Mag, a little bit different story. You know, 100 yards, 3 groups at 3 shots each. We used Remington Core-Locked 150 grain, and the best that I could get was 2 1/4 inches on the 300 Win Mag. Now, I did do some research online, and what I did read is that the 300 Win Mag specifically actually prefers larger bullets, so 180 grain, 220 grain. That's probably what you're going to want to use for this rifle to get the best accuracy, the best grouping. So fortunately I didn't have those, I just had the 150s, so I was only going to get that 2 1/4 inch out of it. But if you do have those larger bullets, I would definitely go for those to get your best chance at better accuracy with a 300 Win Mag. In terms of recoil, what can I say? It's a .30-06 and a 300 Win Mag. There's definitely some recoil involved here. They are heavier sporting rifles, which is nicer, so it does absorb a little bit of that recoil, but you definitely feel it. So getting a vest with a pad, or you know, if you're wearing a coat, is definitely going to be more helpful when you're shooting these rifles. But you know, in terms of reliability, loading, cycling, ejecting, we had absolutely no problems. And again, it is really cool to shoot a 300 Win Mag out of a semi-automatic hunting rifle. Now that we talked about some of the rifles that we actually have here on the table today, let's go into some of the features that you'd find with these rifles. So as I mentioned before, the Browning bar is a sporting rifle. It's a gas-operated, semi-automatic sporting rifle that offers a box magazine that actually attaches to a hinge trap door for loading. Now the receiver itself is actually machined from solid steel, and it doesn't have any exposed screws, pins, or holes besides the holes that you would use for mounting a scope. So definitely is nice and closed up so no debris or dust can get in there. Now it was actually designed for long action, and the bolt itself actually has 7 locking lugs for a very reliable design. The rifle originally was chambered for 243 Winchester, 270 Winchester, 308 Winchester, as well as 30-06 standard. However, what I really like about the bar is that it can actually do Magnum calibers too, which is pretty unique considering it's semi-auto and at the price point that it comes in. So it actually can offer a 7mm Rem mag, a 300 Win Mag, as well as a 338 Win Mag. And as for the standard calibers, when you're taking a look at specs, it comes in at about 7.5 pounds with a 22-inch barrel and a 43.25-inch overall length. And then when you're taking a look at the Magnum calibers, the rifle comes in at a pound heavier at 8.5 pounds with a 24-inch barrel and 45.25-inch overall length. And then the Magnum calibers also come with that recoil pad just for added comfort. Now, both rifles do come in at a 13.5-inch length of pull. The triggers are different and they do vary. However, it was advertised at a 4-pound weight trigger pull, but I've noticed that on the 30-06, this one actually came in at a 3.5-pound pull, and the 300 Win Mag came in at about a 4.25-pound pull. And then they both do utilize that cross bolt safety, which is behind the trigger. Now, although that there are multiple grades of this rifle made, most of them do just feature, a blued barrel and a receiver, as well as French walnut wood on the stock and the forend, and they do have that hand checkering. Now, if you are looking into different grades as a collector, you'd be looking for 5 different main grades that are out there in the wild, as well as some commemorative, as well as special edition models that they've made throughout the years. Now, we're not going to get too deep into all the different grades here today, but it is good to know that, each grade does offer something different to it. So I'm going to talk about that briefly here next. So when we take a look here at grade 1, both these rifles actually here on the table are grade 1 examples. It's got a plain blued receiver with really no engraving or any embellishments or anything like that. Now, when you step up to grade 2, it does actually have an engraved game animal in the side of it. Depending on what caliber it is going to determine what animal that is. And then it also has just a regular blued receiver. Now, when you get to grade 3 and 4, now you're talking about that big game animal scene. So it's not just the animal head. Now you've got a little bit of a scene there. It is hand engraved, and it's actually engraved on a chrome plated receiver. And then lastly, if you're looking at grade 5, which is the highest grade out of the 5 there, you're looking at a receiver that is deeply hand engraved and actually features inlaid 18-karat gold, inlay, I guess you could say, on a blued receiver. So those are really like the 5 different grades that you'd be looking for. And the only difference in grades is just the cosmetic and the look to them. In terms of functionality, they're actually all the same. So if you do like that, if you like the enhancements and a little bit more of the flash, you definitely want to look at those higher grades or maybe from a collectability standpoint. But if you're simply just looking for function on the rifle, any of those grades are going to do the job. And a lot of people prefer grade 1 or 2, and actually that's the most that you're going to find out there if you're looking to purchase one for yourself. Obviously, they're the most reasonably priced as well. Now that we've talked about some of the features and the different grades, I would like to talk about some of the variations and the models that they've actually made throughout the years. So we'll get into that here next. All right, so the bar itself was actually originally made in Belgium from 1967 till about 1972, and then assembly actually transferred over to the Viana plant in Portugal in about 1973, and then so on. Now, as for the different models, it's actually easiest to differentiate them by year and some subtle differences actually on the gun itself. Now, the first is the standard bar, which was produced between 1967 and 1992. And those were the Type 1 and Type 2 models. The Type 1 model was produced between 1967 and 1976, and then the Type 2 model was produced between 1976 and 1992. The main noticeable difference between these two rifles is that on the Type 1, the receiver actually has flares, or it's kind of scalloped out towards the end of the stock, whereas the Type 2 just has a flat receiver all the way through. Now, both of the rifles that I have here today are actually Type 1 rifles. Now, additionally, the Type 2 also had some trigger work done to it. However, I don't actually have a lot of the details of what they specifically did to the trigger, but I do know that there are some differences between the Type 1 and Type 2. Now, a few things that are also important to really note about the Type 1 is that due to that receiver design, it is nearly impossible to find a replacement stock if your original stock becomes cracked or chipped. These were actually hand fitted at the factory for the most part, and Browning does not offer these anymore on those Type 1 rifles. However, with the Type 2, you can actually still get those if your stock does get cracked or chipped. It's just the Type 1s that they do not offer. In the actual earlier years between 1967 and 1972, you'd also really want to be cautious of Browning saltwood. Now, I'm not going to go too far into detail about this here, and I actually will probably make another video in the future about what saltwood is and you know what more to look for. But it is important to note that Browning Arms and the Morton Salt Company did have a saltwood problem. In 1966, they pretty much collaborated to work together. One of the big things is that Browning wanted to keep up with the demand on their guns and their production, and in order to do that, they basically had to figure out a way to dry out the stock blanks a little bit faster. So Morton Salt approached them and said, hey, we've got this way that we can use our salt to dry these stock blanks out faster. And you know, on paper it looked great, and it actually did really work. The problem is that how they set this up, they actually stacked these stock blanks on top of each other on these racks. So with time, the salt and the water and things would drip, and then it would actually get absorbed and actually infused into the lower stock blanks, which basically created a perfect environment, you know, for rust. So a few things to check if you are looking to buy one of the original Type 1 models that were made in Belgium. Take the butt plate of the stock off to look for any kind of rust, you know, on the screws. If you can take the stock off completely and take a look for any rust under there, that's also a good call. If you can take the fore end off to inspect the gas system and the internals for rust. Those are all really good things that you'd want to do if you were shopping around for a Type 1 to make sure that it is not a saltwood Type 1. The good news is, though, is that if you do that inspection and you don't see any rust or anything like that, you're pretty much in the clear because it's been 50 years. Now, these Type 2 rifles were actually produced all the way until 1992. Then in 1993, the Mark II was released, which updated the trigger, the bolt, and the gas system to improve accuracy and reliability. Now, this is also when the BOSS system was introduced. The BOSS system actually stands for Ballistic Optimizing Shooting System. This was basically a device that was on the end of the rifle that is said to control the vibrations of the barrel, which would actually lead to more accurate groups. So if you are interested in learning more about that BOSS system, you know, Browning does have an entire page dedicated to talking about what it was, how it works, all that stuff on their website, but I'm not going to get too far into it today. Now, personally, I've actually never shot one of these rifles with the BOSS system, so I can't speak much about it. But if you do have, you know, any comments, or if you've actually owned one or shot one and you feel like it was a big improvement or maybe not so much, I'd love to read about that in the comments. Now, this Mark II also was when Browning introduced their Bar Safari model, as well as a few other variations that came out. And lastly, the final generation of the bar was actually the Mark III, or the MK3, that was released in 2016. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on these models, mainly just because I haven't had a chance to get my hands on them or shoot them, but hopefully that will change and we can get our hands on one, and it will lead to a future video. Now, I know that I shared a lot about the bar, covering features, grades, models, and even some history, so I definitely appreciate you if you've made it this far throughout the video. Overall, though, I'd really say that the bar is a classic sporting rifle known by many, and it's really a must for any avid Browning or sporting rifle collector. And actually, if you're interested in getting your hands on one, I'd say that now, more than ever, is probably the best time to look. And the main reason for that is that Browning has actually announced that they've discontinued the Browning bar production. So once that old stock is sold out and off the shelves, you're not going to be able to get any new rifles. However, you know, if you're looking for a Type 1, Type 2, Mark II, or Mark III, there's going to be plenty of pre-owned out there. It's just that you might be fighting higher prices. As much as I do like the Browning bar, I do want to make a shameless plug, and I'm sure I'm going to get destroyed here in the comments. but I actually really do still prefer the Remington 742 or the 7400. Those are also both gas-operated semi-automatic hunting rifles. I'd say probably not only do I have more experience with those, but as I mentioned earlier, I really do like that they've got the detachable box magazine along with that bolt lever or that bolt release lever on the magazine itself. So even though these are really small differences, but that's just my preference. Now at the same time though, I will say that it was very cool to be able to shoot these Magnum calipers, specifically the 300 Win Mag, because that's just not something that you're going to be able to see every day, especially at the price point that we're getting these rifles at. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys all for joining us today and supporting the channel. Please take that time to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications on all of our future content. And with that being said, this is Scott signing off with The Average Joe's Armory, channel for the average Joe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.